When you think about bad behaviors in the workplace, what comes to mind? Bullying, harassment, maybe even assault. But what about nothing at all? No bullying, but also no hellos, no emails, no eye contact, no contact of any kind. Nothing at all. This is called ostracism. And while many of us don't think of it as bad behavior like we do with bullying or harassment, research shows that being excluded, ignored, or ostracized can have seriously negative effects in the workplace. What kind of effects exactly?
So the effects of ostracism are actually really huge. When people are ostracized, it impacts both the employee and the company in which they work. We know from lots of research that employees who feel excluded or rejected or ostracized at work are much more likely to experience stress, feelings of depression, a lesser sense of belonging. They're more likely to want to withdraw from the organization. They're more likely to quit. So we know it has a huge impact on employees. And of course, that then impacts the people they work with, and it impacts the companies they work in.
So ostracism is a problem, but you can say that about any kind of bad behavior in the workplace. So how much of a problem is ostracism compared to other bad behaviors? To find out, Dr. Robinson and her colleagues did a series of studies comparing the effects of being ostracized in the workplace versus being harassed. So what did they find?
We might think that, being ignored is not particularly harmful compared to perhaps being yelled at or belittled or verbally abused, for example. But our research actually shows the opposite. Ostracized employees, compared to those who experience harassment, are more likely to quit. They're more likely to withdraw from the organization. They're more likely to report physical illness. And they're more likely to have declines in their performance. So our research shows, based upon a number of different studies that we did, that being ostracized at work is actually more detrimental than being harassed.
So harassment, which means actively trying to bother, demean, and embarrass someone, is somehow less harmful than just ignoring them? How does it make sense?
So we examined, why does ostracism actually have a bigger impact than harassing behaviors? And what we found is that the big difference was sense of belonging. What we argue and find evidence of is that ostracism poses a greater threat to our fundamental need to belong. As humans, we all have this core unconscious need to belong to other humans. We know that we really can't survive. We're social beings, and we really wouldn't be effective, maybe not even live, if we didn't have that connection to others. So if there's any sense of being separated from people, we're really tuned into it and we react to it. And it's really, really painful. So we know that ostracism is much more likely to pose that threat than harassment. Now, you might think, well, harassment's so negative, but it still includes you. It still involves you in a role. So if you're being mistreated by others, you still exist to them. You're still in a relationship with them, even if it's a negative one. It's negative attention, but it's still attention. In contrast, ostracism is like a social death. It's almost like if you're treated as invisible or you're ignored, it's as though you're the equivalent of, say, a piece of furniture, as opposed to being a human who's worthy of others' attention.
In other words, the reason why ostracism is so harmful is that it's not acting out against someone when we crave interaction. Ostracism means no hellos, no emails, no eye contact, no contact of any kind, not even bullying. Nothing at all. Being ostracized means feeling like you're basically nothing and no one. But seriously, being treated like furniture? Ouch. So it's pretty clear that we should think of ostracism as bad behavior in the workplace. It's more harmful than harassment, and it also happens a lot more too. Dr. Robinson found in her research that during the last 6 months of work, 71% of employees felt that they were ostracized at least once, while only 49% felt that they were harassed. Compare those rates with verbal abuse at 30% and physical violence at less than 1%. And it turns out that being ignored is, unfortunately, a very common experience. So why does this happen so much in a workplace? And why aren't we doing something about this?
Employees have a variety of what they consider reasonable reasons to ignore or avoid people. One is they don't like having conflict. Lots of people don't like having conflict. And if they know they can have conflict with someone, they might want to just avoid them. They may feel like they can't resolve it because they don't have the skills to resolve conflict directly. Or it could be that an individual is particularly harmful to them, and so they find it safer to just stay away from that person. What we also know is that sometimes ostracism occurs because people are doing it by mistake or inadvertently. So they're not trying to leave someone out, but they mistakenly forget to invite someone. There's a variety of reasons why people might do things or not do things that ends up being perceived by others as ostracism when it wasn't intended that way. So unlike, say, abuse and harassing behaviors at work, there may be some relatively innocuous reasons why people engage in behavior that gets seen by others as ostracism.
Okay, so dealing with ostracism might be a little more complicated than just telling people to stop. But is there anything we can do for ourselves personally? Any practical tips or advice?
So the million-dollar question is, what can we do? I think there's a couple of things that both organizations and individuals can do when it comes to ostracism. One is just making people more aware of its consequences. People need to understand that even though it looks innocuous, being ignored or being treated as invisible is in fact really harmful, and nobody enjoys that experience. And if people understand the harm they're causing, they have more motivation to try alternative ways to interact with people. For the individual who may face ostracism, there's a couple of pieces of advice that I have. One is to first check with others. Seek some validation, just to provide extra evidence as to whether it's really maybe you are being overly sensitive or really maybe there is something to it. Where possible, directly discuss it with the parties involved, just to try and get a sense of what might be some reasons that you might be being left out if you are at all. If you find that the experience is an ongoing pattern that's hurting your ability to work and function, your sense of well-being, then I also think you need to take it up with people in the organization that can help you. That might be your supervisor, it might be the HR department, but it needs to be taken seriously, and I think you have every right to try to resolve it in a constructive fashion. So this isn't to suggest that organizations need to create rules about who has to be friends with who. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about here is not engaging in disrespectful behavior. It's respectful behavior to acknowledge someone, to not purposely exclude them from work situations. You don't need to become someone's friend. You don't need to invite them for a drink when you go out on Friday nights, but you can still treat them in a professional and respectful manner. And I think that's a perfectly reasonable request to make of anyone working in organizations today.
Thanks for watching this episode of Work Forward. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and share this with a friend. Special thanks to Sandra Robinson at the University of British Columbia for all her help. I'm Austin Lee, and hope you find new ways to push your work forward.